This first section will then actually focus on Shmuel Eisenstadt's contributions, or some of the basic themes in his contributions to civilizational analysis, world history, and the history of religion. And in particular, the way in which he has reinvigorated what certainly is one of the most intensive, but also to some extent most elusive debates of the late 20th century, namely that about the axial age. Shmuel Eisenstadt helped transform this debate into a core concern for historians of religion, for world historians, but also for social scientists at large. And in doing so, he has helped, I think, shape an interest in historical analysis to a greater extent than any social scientist after Max Weber. Produced also monumental works on the history of religion and related that to societal developments. And we have now a panel of very eminent historical social scientists and historians to debate some of these core themes. And I would like to ask, first of all, Professor Goldstone, who is an eminent historical sociologist, to open this discussion.
Well, thank you. I'd like to open by expressing my appreciation to Professor Eisenstadt, who's been a personal inspiration in his work and his teaching throughout my entire career. The two concepts I'd like to discuss are that of the axial age and multiple modernities. And part of the brilliance of Professor Eisenstadt's work has been to bring these two concepts together in a way that improves the power of both. The situation of globalization and the potential clash of civilizations are often presented to us as something modern. As since the end of the Cold War, these are the tendencies that are going to shape our world. And that may be true, but I think we can only understand this by putting it in a broader historical perspective, and that is where Professor Eisenstadt's ideas are extremely helpful. The notion of the axial age is, I think, straightforward and powerful. It is that prior to the 5th century BC, the religious world was a world of pluralities. Societies had many gods, and they tried to propitiate those gods through sacrifices. But out of this plurality was a shift between the 5th century BC, roughly, and the 6th century AD, in which various societies moved away from this plural version of a panoply of gods to a vision of a single transcendent power, a single god or a single overarching power that demanded not physical sacrifices, but allegiance to a moral code. This transcendent power, calling people to act ethically, was a concept that actually spread all across the world in different forms, from Hinduism to Christianity to Talmudic Judaism. You find this shift to a moral life. And this really transformed the world from one of kind of constant intermingling plurality of gods to a competition between various centers, each characterized by their own concept of this transcendent unity. This pattern dominated for about 1,000 years, and then in the 17th century there was a return to plurality, as it were, not a return to a kind of pagan plurality of gods, but under the power of a rational skepticism, the certainty that any one group had it right, that they could speak authoritatively and certainly of the nature of the divine or of the nature of the earthly, started to give way to a skepticism based in discoveries of the natural world and an increasingly complex debate about morality. This skeptical rationality, this uncertainty, created what I think really is the essence of our modern situation. That is, the modern condition is one of perpetual uncertainty and competition between different ideas and perspectives. Now, to the extent that this skeptical rationality is dominant, we find ourselves in a positive vein in kind of a comfortable pluralism. Religious persecution and the idea of an authoritative religion or authoritative state has to give way if no one perspective can be conclusively demonstrated to be right. If that's the case, then the others can't be conclusively demonstrated to be wrong, and we move to a tolerant, pluralist society. That's the positive outcome of a skeptical rationality. On the other hand, there have always been two strong counter-tendencies. One is to seek to extend rationality to provide a new basis for a rational certainty, and this unfortunately leads to the modern totalitarianisms of fascism and communism. The other response is to try and find a renewed moral certainty, and this leads to the resurgence of fundamentalist religions, which again assert that they have the right answer to the exclusion of others. I don't think we will get to the so-called end of history with the passing of communism. That was just the passing of one particular mode of rational certainty. What I believe is that the modern condition will always leave us in what Professor Eisenstadt has labeled these multiple modernities, different views of what our existence should be like, what rules should guide us. But these multiple modernities will also constantly be contested by people seeking to assert a rational certainty or a religious certainty, because there is something still fundamentally uncomfortable about having to live with uncertainty. Now, this is particularly the case, or as Professor Eisenstadt said, in a globalized world where different centers and peripheries are more than ever constantly intermingling, bumping up against each other, competing with each other to assert their prerogatives. In this struggle, it is all the more tempting for different groups to try and assert their position with the solidity of an utter certainty. And so both moral and rational certainties will be asserting themselves. I think part of what we see as the clash of civilizations is an effort by a fundamentalist revival in Islam to assert that certainty in the face of an overpowering modernization of multiplicity and uncertainty. And I think this is particularly because we have to recognize the terms on which different centers and peripheries have met are not even. That is, fundamental to the notion of mutual toleration is mutual respect. One has to concede that other ideas, other groups could be correct, and therefore deserve a freedom of their own self-direction and a freedom to participate in a broader society. But if the meeting between different groups is on the basis of a presumed inequality, enforcing a lack of dignity on the other, and this is the heritage of the Christian imperial relationship between 19th century Europe and the rest of the world, that heritage, which is still very much with us and still felt very much throughout the world, leads to a perception of multiple modernities as a situation that could entail a definite inequality, a persistent inequality between different groups. And it is fighting against that, an effort to restore dignity and fight against repeated humiliations, that I think gives much of the power and motivation to efforts to reassert a fundamental certainty in non-Western or even anti-Western modes of discourse. I'll stop there, simply pointing out that the modern world does have a dilemma. How do we restore a true situation of equality among different centers pursuing their multiple modernities? How do we restore and grant a sense of equal historical power and dignity to different viewpoints? Because I think that's necessary if we're going to enjoy the potential of a world of peaceful, pluralist competition and continued intellectual debate and growth, and extend that across all of the civilizations that continue to jostle for space in our modern world. Thank you.